This week, the topic is the presidency. I want to start with have you look at some data. This graphic shows presidential approval ratings over half a century, going back to Dwight David Eisenhower through the current president, Barack Obama. There's two trend lines on this graph. I'd like you, for the time being, to ignore the red trend line and focus strictly on the blue one. These are the monthly approval ratings as measured by the Gallup poll. Every month, the Gallup poll, going back to the 1950s, every month the Gallup poll asks a random sample of Americans, do you approve or disapprove of the way that the president's handling his job? Okay? And this graph shows the percent that says that they approve. Okay? So take a moment, study this blue trend line, and tell me what you see, what patterns, if any, you can pull out of that trend line.
Very jerky.
Okay? Very jerky.
Surprised it went up to 90.
There's a lot of, maybe what you mean by jerky is that there are a lot of undulations in it, right? Like it's up, it's down, it's up, it's down. In fact, it can be very dramatic up and down kind of motion. So that's pretty good. It's ranging from a low of about just a little over 20% to a high of right at 90%. So about 70 percentage points. That's a pretty wide range. Anything else you notice other than the fact that it's undulates and it's a pretty wide range of values?
Well, it looked like a good section if it stayed within between 50 and a little more than 80 at the start, and then it kind of dropped.
The average, you okay? Chill. The average approval rating over this period is about 50%. If you calculated the average of all the monthly data, it'd be about 50%. Anything else? What if let me get out of this version here for just a moment. This version here is more updated. Okay? The data goes through the first part of Barack Obama's term. This one only goes through about the first 2/3 of George W. Bush's term. It's an older value, but the reason I'm showing you this one is because it's broken up into different presidencies. And so it may be a little bit easier to pick out some patterns here. So you can isolate Eisenhower or Kennedy or Johnson or any of the individual presidents. Any patterns you see there?
The Eisenhower.
Are you shaking your head no because
It don't look accurate.
What do you mean it doesn't look accurate?
Like, it just keeps going up and down. It's not accurate. It's not like...
Why does that have to mean, what does that mean about accuracy?
It's just
Are you saying that when the Gallup people measure this public approval ratings, they're not getting it right? Was that what you mean by accurate?
I guess.
Okay.
I just don't... You look at the chart, it's not accurate.
I guess I'm just having a little trouble understanding what you mean by accurate.
Like the chart, everything, it's just all different numbers.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of variation in the value of the data, but by accurate, I assume, when I understand you to say when you say accurate, that somehow Gallup is missing it. Right? Like somehow they're saying at this time point only 40% of Americans approve of the president's job performance, but that's not really accurate. It's like some other value. In reality, it's some other value. I don't know. I think the Gallup people are pretty good at what they do. Their polling is pretty scientific. It's pretty well honed and reliable, so that when they report to us that a certain percentage of Americans say, based on a random sample of 1,000 or 1,100 people or something like that, that 49% approve of the way that the president's handling his job, that is pretty accurate in the sense that roughly 49% of the general population approves of the way that the president's handling his job. You have to have some, if you are not going to accept that as an article of faith just because I tell you that that's the case, then you're going to have to go take some courses on probability theory and statistical analysis, and then maybe you'll believe it. But if you can just believe me when I say that the Gallup people are pretty good at producing reliable surveys, then now whether it's valid or not, that's a whole other question. You know, but reliability is pretty good. Any patterns? Anybody see any patterns?
Anything to do with the fact that at the end of all the different presidents' terms, well, most of them, that their approval rating percentage went down?
Okay, that's one of the things that I was hoping you would pull out. For any given president, there is a trend downward, isn't there? With one notable exception, okay, and that's Clinton, because here Clinton begins at a little less than 60%, but when he leaves office in early 2001, he's actually in the mid-60s. Clinton is the exception, but the rest of them, there's clearly a trend here, and some of them it's more dramatic than others, right? I mean, some of them here it's really pretty dramatic. Look at Carter, right? But okay, so that's one. That's pretty good. Okay, that's one of the things that I was hoping you would pull out. By the way, do you have any explanation for that? Why would that?
Because
Clinton aside.
I don't know. It's the end of their term anyway, so they can't get reelected.
Well, but the question that Gallup is asking people, and Gallup is not the only polling organization that does this, right? But since I'm using the Gallup poll, the question that they're asking people is, do you approve of the way that the president's handling his job? And people either say yes or no, and then they count the data, and they determine that a certain percentage. Well, you're right. With all except Clinton, the trend is pretty unmistakable, right? They start off relatively high, they end relatively low. David?
I think that sometimes, like depending on what the president has done, maybe in the beginning of his term, I think that it's just something that people just keep in their head. Maybe they don't keep up with everything he's doing, but there's that one thing they keep in their head and they just judge off of that. I mean, like in all of them, they make pretty important decisions, I guess.
Let me rephrase the question, because you may be onto something here. I just want to make sure that this is what you're onto. Let me rephrase the question. Rather than thinking about the beginning point and the ending point of each individual president's term, let's take each president and just talk about the beginning point. Why at the beginning of each president's term would there be these heightened approval ratings? Because let's face it, they don't have. If the question is, do you approve or disapprove of the way that the president's handling his job, in the first couple of months of a president's term, there's not much for the public to go on, right? I mean, how can you really make 2 months into a president's term, how can you really make an informed judgment about how well the president's handling his job? Wouldn't he need some time to sort of demonstrate how well he's handling his job? But that doesn't stop people from responding, yes or no. Right? So what we consistently find here is that people are saying, yes, they approve of the way that the president's handling his job. But then as the months go by, or maybe even in some cases the weeks go by, those approval ratings come down. And so that's really, I guess, maybe what we ought to focus on, is why at the beginning of each president's term are these heightened approval ratings.
I was going to say that I think that without a high approval rating, he probably wouldn't have been elected.
Well, but clearly, there are people saying in response to this question that they approve of the way that the president's handling his job, and that includes people who did not vote for the president. Because, for example, let's take Clinton. In early 1992, almost 60% say that they approve of the way that he's handling his job, and even though that's comparatively low when compared to his predecessors, it's certainly it's a higher percentage than the people who voted for him in the 1992 election. Bill Clinton only got about 43% of the vote in the 1992 presidential election. So if 60% are saying that they approve of the president's job performance, that includes a lot of people who didn't vote for Bill Clinton, right?
So they just like the fact that maybe somebody different is in office.
Okay, possibly. Anything else? Just the idea of change. It gets people optimistic or something, right? Maybe. Anything else?